in the 90s, it was common practice for food and drink mascots to get their own video games. It happened to Chester Cheetah, it happened to Spot, and it even happened to the Noid. And while most of these games were probably greenlit just so they could push more advertising out to impressionable young children, a few of these games actually turned out to be pretty decent. And so that's why today I want to talk about the surprisingly solid platformer that unfortunately never left Japan. Coca-Cola Kid for the Sega Game Gear. And while there is no way to record Game Gear footage on a television, unfortunately, I do have to resort to an emulator, which I don't like to do. But I have heard that some people have been turning their Game Gears into consoles, so hey, if anybody knows how to do that, please let me know.
Saso Shonen Eiyuden Coca-Cola Kiddo, or Dashing Boy Saga Coca-Cola Kid, was developed by Aspect and published by Sega for the Game Gear in Japan on August 5th, 1994. Apparently, there's also a 1985 Australian romantic comedy film called Coca-Cola Kid, but unless the movie has a young anime boy with a devil-may-care attitude as its main character, they're probably unrelated. Anyway, Coca-Cola Kid is the story of the aptly named Koki, a young boy who is out to rescue his teacher, who's apparently been kidnapped for some reason. I don't know, I figured since I had to emulate the game to capture footage for this episode, I might as well play it with the English patch, but the story still doesn't seem to make much sense. I mean, most kids would probably be thrilled if their teacher went missing, but I guess Miss Sakurako is pretty hot, so maybe Koki's hot for teacher. Then again, we're questioning the motives of a character named Koki, so I may be overthinking this a little bit. Koki's quest takes him through 5 levels. Each level has 2 stages and a boss fight, giving you a surprisingly lengthy adventure for a handheld that devoured batteries like they were delicious, refreshing Coca-Cola. The earlier stages are pretty straight shots, but as the game progresses they become a bit more labyrinth-esque in nature, full of dead ends and looping paths. The earlier levels will sometimes even have skateboards scattered about, which are pretty cool, but they're not nearly as cool as they should be because most of the time as soon as you hop on one, you go careening into the scenery and get knocked off. There are lots of crates and boxes to smash open that usually hold power-ups like bottles of Coke to refill Koki's health, or coins that can be spent after each stage to buy things like health power-ups, continues, or Coke discs that can be used as projectiles. The projectiles are kinda useless, so I recommend saving your coins for health and continues, because the game gets pretty hard on the tail end. The stages are littered with enemies that don't have anything to do with soda, like boxers, robot birds, ninjas, and disco balls that shoot lightning. Luckily, Koki is up to the task, armed with amazing jumping abilities, a sweet roundhouse kick, and even an elbow dash that can be charged by holding down and pressing the attack button. If the hold down and a button for a dash move as well as the game's HUD didn't already give it away, the game's developer, Aspect, also developed all the Sonic games for the Game Gear. In fact, Coca-Cola Kid feels a lot like a Sonic game. It's very fast, and Koki has a lot of momentum factoring into his movements and jumps. I think it's pretty safe to say that if you're a fan of the Game Gear Sonic games, you're going to enjoy this.
What originally caught my eye about Coca-Cola Kid was Koki's design, because he's exactly the kind of character that I used to draw myself as when I was in elementary school. I was just kind of a sucker for the backwards hat and cool shorts and layered shirts. And even as a 30-year-old man, I still look at that design and think, man, I wish I looked that cool.
I don't know, I just think Koki's an awesome character. I was born in the mid-'80s, so growing up I was conditioned to want to be a kid who wears his hat backwards, drinks a lot of Coke, does backflips, and gets sick air on a skateboard. I guess there's some things you just don't outgrow. But honestly, despite the Coke branding and Koki's 90s design, the game is surprisingly solid, especially for a Game Gear game. Despite some troubles with jumps because of how Koki's momentum works, the game controls extremely well, and the speed is never really an issue, even though that would be an easy thing to mess up with how small the screen is, and how hard it is to see things in front of you. Even with Koki's plethora of moves like wall jumps, wall slides, and jump kicks, you never really feel like the control's fighting you. And like I mentioned before, the stage design is quite impressive, and I think it would be even if this were a console game. The stages are really big, but never feel too daunting, and they mix up the platforming enough to keep them interesting. They never overstay their welcome, yet still demand enough trial and error that you won't be able to blaze through them without taking your lumps first. One of my favorite things is how many secret passages there are, with tons of walls you can knock down with a kick or a charge attack that usually lead to some kind of power-up. I mean, where else can you see a kid hopped up on caffeinated sugar water break through cement walls with his elbow? The game's bosses are easy enough, with easy-to-learn patterns that won't give you too much trouble. They don't seem related to anything story-wise, though, if you can really call the game's bare-bones plot a story. They're little more than obstacles at the end of each stage, and they don't tell you much after you kick their teeth in. Not to spoil the game's gripping narrative, but the final boss is some kind of dominatrix, which seems really weird in a game about a kid trying to save his teacher. But when you beat her, there's no dialogue from her. It's just Miss Sakurako thanking Koki for rescuing her, then hugging him so hard that her ample bosom suffocates him. The working theory is that Miss Sakurako is the dominatrix, and she was brainwashed or something, and while the official art on the back of the special edition Game Gear box lists Miss Sakurako and Queen Julian as separate characters, they do look a lot alike. Oh yeah, the game has two versions in Japan, the basic black cartridge and a special red cartridge that was bundled with a branded red Game Gear. I've just got the basic black cart myself, but man, that red cart and console look really nice. As far as Game Gear games go, Coca-Cola Kid looks and sounds really good. There's a lot of color going on, which is surprising when they could have just made everything red to really hit you over the head with the Coke branding. The animation's really nice, with Koki's movements being very fluid and impressive looking. The game's music is decent enough, and while composer Saori Kobayashi didn't have a lot to work with as far as the Game Gear sound chip is concerned, it fits the lighthearted tone of the game well. Overall, the game's just a lot of fun. I enjoy a good platformer, so when I heard about this game, I was definitely on a mission to snag a copy, and when I was finally able to pop it in my Game Gear, I was not disappointed. It's got a great difficulty curve, and despite some frustrating parts near the end of the game, it's a pretty relaxing ride. It's just so well put together that it throws any preconceived notions about games starring corporate mascots right out the window.
Now, since Coca-Cola Kid is an import, you're not likely to find it sitting around at your local shop, but fortunately, like every game I talk about, it's still not going to cost you very much money even if you do have to look online. A loose cart will go anywhere from $10 to $20, but I do see it pop up a lot in lot auctions with other games for anywhere from $20 to $30. The special edition red cartridge will run you a little bit more, but if you want the super cool red limited edition Game Gear console, be prepared to shell out a few $100.
Coca-Cola Kid is a surprisingly solid and enjoyable platformer that could easily have been little more than a lazy advertisement. It's got a lot of personality and is very mechanically sound despite being on a handheld that wasn't really known for providing any gripping experiences. It's a shame there's no way to play Game Gear games on a TV because Game Gears are getting harder to come by in working condition, and as such it's getting tough to recommend games for it. But if you've got Sega's bulky portable and enjoy a good platformer, then Coca-Cola Kid is definitely something you'll want to pick up.